Welcome to MFP Live. I'm Donna Ladd with this very first show of 2023, and it's a good one. But first, let me, as always, say hey to my co-host and the publisher of the Mississippi Free Press, Kimberly Griffin. Hey, Kimberly.
Hello, and Happy New Year, everyone.
I know, right? We survived another holiday season. That was good. And so tonight, this is kind of a perfect way to kick off, to kick off the new year and the conversations that we love to have here at MFP Live and in the, as we say, pages of the Mississippi Free Press online. And so we're going to be having a conversation about racial healing and a whole lot of things around that. But with some folks who really have been doing this kind of work with people of all ages and all different kinds of backgrounds here in all of our native Mississippi for years now. Two people that Kimberly and I know well. We worked together in various capacities over the years. Rhea has been on the show before. So let me just kind of introduce them briefly to you guys, and then I'm going to kick it to Rhea to kind of set up what's going on with the Racial Healing Day on Tuesday. Rhea Williams Bishop is the director of programming. Am I right with that? For the WK Kellogg Foundation for Mississippi and New Orleans, which is a shared office. She is a native of Carthage, Mississippi, right over there next to where I'm from on that side of Philadelphia. So like they're in the middle, not too far from here at all. And then Vaughn Gordon is the executive director of the Alluvial Collective, which is an organization that was formerly known as the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation, it was based at the University of Mississippi. Vaughn is a native of Moorhead, Mississippi, in Fannie Lou Hamer's Sunflower County. Also Jim Eastland's Sunflower County, but we can circle back to that if we want. And we're just and has worked with young people for a long time in the state as well. And so I'm really excited to have you both here to talk about this very urgent topic. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, well, Donna and Kimberly, thank you for having us. Glad to be on with Vaughn, and really proud to be able to represent the WK Kellogg Foundation in this endeavor. And as the leading philanthropic partner in the movement to achieve racial healing and advance racial equity, just proud that our efforts and investments are guided by the belief that children deserve an equitable opportunity to grow, learn, and thrive. And so racial equity and racial healing are core values of the foundation, and it really shows up through all of our investments in communities to create the conditions where children can thrive. And we all understand that in order for children to thrive, their families need to be able to provide for them, but also their communities must be equitable places of opportunity. And I think that's key to the conversation tonight and our efforts with the National Day of Racial Healing. Racial equity is much more than a slogan for the Kellogg Foundation. In 2007, we made the commitment to being committed to being an anti-racist organization that promotes racial equity and healing as core strategies for us achieving our mission and our vision around and on behalf of the issues of children, families, and communities. So you might ask, so what is the National Day of Racial Healing and why? Well, it's an annual observance that we established it occurs every Tuesday following Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And we are all inspired to work, inspired by the work and all the words that Dr. King has shared. And we wanted to do something that would help us live up to his dream and his legacy. And so we understand that that's a day to celebrate. Most people, it's a day of service. But then after that, what? what's next? How do we create a situation where we have ongoing dialogue that goes beyond one day? Dialogue where we can bring individuals, communities, and organizations together and acknowledge the values that we share as people, build trust in each other, develop relationships, and then inspire collective action on how we heal. That's how it came about. So Donna mentioned it's Tuesday, January 17th. We're going to be live prime time with MSNBC and Telemundo platforms. There's going to be an English version with Telemundo, and then when Telemundo will be Spanish, then there'll be an English version. The town hall for Telemundo begins at 6 Central. The town hall in English will begin at 9 Central Standard Time. And we're going to be hosted by Chris Hayes, Joyanne Reed, Jermaine Lee. Telemundo will have Lori Montenegro and Johanna Suarez as our moderators and leading us in a conversation around the theme Connect, Build Relationships, and Bridge Divides. So hopefully you all can join us.
We would love to join you. We actually have an event an hour and a half before that we'll be telling everybody about at the end of the show that we'll be part of, and then we can just kind of flip over and watch what you guys are doing. So it's like a whole, several hours of it. So Rhea, before I kick it to Kimberly real quick, I've said on here before when you've been on here, I was a Kellogg fellow several years back.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was, but I also happened to have kind of been honored to be asked to go to San Diego back. I think that was like 7 years ago when this was starting, right?
Yes.
Like this, when you guys were talking about it, and there was a lot of conversation about what these words mean. I know the words truth, racial healing, and transformation has been a phrase that's been used a lot. And then you were using the word equity, which we use a lot too. I would love for you to just define the way Kellogg and you personally define these words for people, so that they kind of know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you would mention that San Diego trip. That was probably, I think, my first 7 years. I've been with the foundation 7 years, and that was one of my first large events, and I was blown away. Racial healing isn't just important. I think it's essential and at the very heart of racial equity. So we know racism impacts everybody, especially our children. And I think oftentimes it really prevents us individually and as a country from living up to our ideals of opportunity and equality. We live in a polarized society where we often fail to recognize each other's shared humanity or the diversity of our collective history and experiences. And so we feel that we have to do everything in our power to strengthen the ties that bind us to each other, rather than focusing on what divides us. And then racial healing has to be an essential part of that process. The way it happens and the way we define it, it's powered by people who want positive change within themselves and throughout their community. And it occurs only when we're free to speak openly, while we are also actively listening to and learning the truth about our shared history and negative impacts created by individual and systemic racism. And I think it was interesting at that San Diego meeting, we actually did circles where we actually talked about just each other and learned so much. And I think many people who were around the table and around in the circle learned more about each other, and then without even thinking about racial equity. And those circles were just blew me away. And it was a little bit of time, but in that little bit of time, we learned some truths about everybody in that circle that opened us up to healing. I thought it was a beautiful thing, and Vaughn can probably tell you a whole lot more about that. Quick example. that I found online. I pieced it together in terms of my personal explanation for people to break it down. So first, equality is being on the party planning committee. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusivity is being asked to dance. And then belonging is dancing like nobody's watching you. You're able to be yourself. So healing gets us to all these different levels and stages.
Yeah, this, if I may, thank you. The last 2 minutes almost sounded like a commercial for the Alluvial Collective. But I will tell you, I first really encountered this work in a well-designed, structured way when I was in college. And it left an incredible impression on me. And one of the reasons it did, so because I had grown up with equality as a thing, in Dr. King's speeches and everybody's speech, equality was on the signs at protest. But equality, effectively kind of refers to sameness. It does not take into account all of the ways that history and systems and our identities kind of shape how we show up. And so I think when we think about equity, equity is the way of accounting for all of the diversity we represent, all the uniqueness of our experiences, the cumulative impact of the burdens we've had to bear, created by culture and the structures and systems that we operate under. So I like to think about equality as kind of input. We know what input is, and we can be satisfied if we make sure every kid at the party gets a piece of candy. But equity really focuses on the outcome. And societally, I think if we want an outcome where everybody thrives, like Rhea and the foundation described for children, we have to be conscientious of all of the things that children experience before they get to school, for example, and how if we want them all to thrive, we're going to have to be prepared to take all of that into account and use it in our systems to make sure that they leave our systems thriving. So yeah, that is, that's a part of my understanding of it, and I don't think it's the most complicated thing for us to get across to people. We just have to make the commitment to do it.
One of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is this complicated idea of race, and it's becoming more complicated as we're doing more deeper analysis and having conversations like this one. And it became more complicated. I apparently have an ancestor who was a kind of a flim-flam man, and he could cross racial lines, and so he would marry whichever prosperous young woman of whatever race. He's a mess. I'm gonna write something about him. But there are these, and there's this idea that's happening in Mexico where people with the states in Mexico where enslaved people lived, and they're acknowledging their African heritage. It's this complex idea that it's more than just black and white, which is what I grew up with. And I had a few Latinx friends, but that was about it. How do you talk about and include those ideas for this new way of looking at race and complicity and people who have been able to move through and not maybe have, we think about Meghan Markle, who is a biracial woman, but that wasn't really clear until the racism started.
Vaughn, I think I want to let you tackle that one first.
That's I think a part of the most important thing for us to do, Kim, is to not present it as terribly complicated. People have thought and taught and preached about these issues for a very long time. There are a lot of different people who kind of do diversity and inclusion trainings or kind of talking about the history of our cultures in our country. And they say for every act of oppression whether it was enslaving someone or passing a law that instituted, codified, racism. For every act of oppression, there were acts of resistance all along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw is just one of many who have spent a great deal of time contributing to legal and other forms of scholarship about how our identities are shaped, the impacts that they have on us, the burdens we carry. For example, I just so happen to be on the screen with three amazing women who are dynamic leaders, right? Three of whom identify as Black, two of whom identify as Black, but I also show up as a male, right? And so that carries some privilege for me in a ways that my skin tone tends to leave me with some burdens. So I think, one of the most important things we can do is, kind of help people understand how these things show up in their lives. We're really giving language. We're giving language for experiences that people know. I mean, folks intuitively know, Donna and Rhea, when you describe those circles in San Diego, one of the things that often so transformative for people is you've just given them language for something that they always felt, but didn't quite have the words for. So I think the biggest asset we have, Kimberly, is that a lot of people know these things in their bones. They just don't always have the language to articulate it. And so it gets in the way of the conversations that are necessary, or that lack of language. It's a hindrance to building the kind of community and structures that we want to build, even families for that matter.
Yeah, Kimberly, that was an interesting question. So I'll give you sort of my personal take on it and share a funny story. So, most of the time, and if you're educated in the public school, you've never gotten into these types of conversations. These words are introduced to me literally in my adult life, as a college student at Jackson State. And the organization E Pluribus Unum they came to Mississippi and they went all across the country and did interviews, focus groups with people. And when they asked them what the word equity meant, the majority of the people interviewed thought that it referred to equity, like wealth tied up in your home. They were not privy to. So I think we also have to be careful when we use these words and make sure that we explain what's meant by that. It's basically treating others the way in which you want to be treated, regardless of your skin color, your race, your age, your gender, and understanding that everybody has a story. I can't wait to read the story that you talked about earlier, Kimberly. There are many, many stories in my family I could tell, but it might get me in trouble because we didn't just come here looking the way we look without having all of these issues and some of the trauma tied into those histories in terms of being who we are. And I think it's all about sharing stories, listening to those stories, and meeting people where they are and understanding the history and the culture and the backgrounds that they bring forward, whether it's in community activism, civic engagement, education, you name it. We have to acknowledge that there are issues there, there's trauma there, so there is healing needed. I'm reminded also of the James Baldwin quote that I use all the time. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. We will continue to face and deal with the polarization and the issues that we deal with unless we call the thing that it is, and then work together to address it. It's not about holding anything over anyone's head. It's about talking about the common experiences and finding the commonalities. That's another key part of the healing. So what is it that we can come together on to move forward as a community, as a state, as a nation?
Yeah, I like that word. I don't like that word, but I think that's an adequate word when you talk about trauma. and the racism of this nation, it's traumatic for everybody involved. You know, if you were the person benefiting, if you're the person, because in order to be a jailer, you got to stay there. You can't leave the jail.
That's right.
You can't be free.
That's right.
You know? What are, and this may be a Vaughn question, what are some exercises or things that you have seen happening around this work? And I'd love some stories that have created an understanding of people coming from different places on the racism divide.
Yeah, wow. There've been so many of them. You know, one in particular comes to mind being, so in the work that we do, circles are our mode of operation, and we want to get the tables out of the way. Circles are democratic. People can all see each other. Typically, they can all hear each other. All things biological being equal in terms of hearing. I've been in circles where people have told stories about their childhood, and older white men often start their stories with, you know, I'm just a simple poor kid from whatever community. And the first couple of times I heard that, I was thinking, you know, that's like a politician starting a speech, you know, when you begin that way. But over and over and over and over again, I would hear it. And it seemed like I would start a lot of my stories with, you know, I'm a 225-pound Black man born in Moorhead, Mississippi. And I learned very quickly that, you know, I learned race was taught to me. I was educated in the fact that I was identified as Black, and that had implications. I was, you know, my great grandmother helped raise me, and she was 75 or 76 when I was born, had grown up in the hill country. She had learned some hard lessons through the racist system. So I was very sensitive to race, and she was sensitive to protecting this young Black boy. So I grew up with my life framed in a lot of ways by race, and I was conscious of it. It was necessary, right, for my survival. I often say it was really cool that Michael Jackson was Black and Magic Johnson was Black, and, you know, at the time, Ben Carson was Black and really, you know, hip. I don't mean disrespect him, but he was hip at that time because he was a neurosurgeon, right? It meant something really awesome to be Black, but it also had some real implications for my life in terms of how I could do my best to make sure I survived. And so over and over and again in circles, Kim, I would hear people who didn't identify as Black kind of describe their, you know, they would always tell their stories through the lens of some other identity category. But oftentimes for Black people in the room, the Black was always at the center. Black woman, Black man, Black and queer, whatever. But Black always seemed to be so central. So one of the key learnings for me was that there are a lot of people who didn't grow up viewing their lives, their opportunities or whatever through a racial lens. But then there's a whole other part of the population who didn't have a choice, right? People had experiences of being locked out or denied because of this particular identity category. And so things like that, patterns like that start to show in circles that become, you know, it makes it a learning lab for people. And the other thing about it is in our work, you don't have the burden of speaking for anyone other than yourself. And you also don't have the privilege of doing it either, right? So when we're engaging, we are telling stories about our experiences. We can't say, well, we all had, because you can't speak for everybody, right? And so that, you know, the individualization of the stories, for me especially, and we hear it from people all the time, is really instructive because we can relate to stories. You give us data and we can often get lost in it, but we remember stories. It was a short, beautiful question, but a real long answer, so I'm sorry.
No,
This is why we're here for.
wonderful.
This is what we're here for. And then I'm gonna turn it over to Donna for real, like I keep saying I'm gonna do. But it's so interesting you talk about you can only speak for yourself, because as Black people, as a certain group of Black people, of educated Black people, you operate as if you are speaking for the race, or you are representing the race in the time that you are standing there. Don't embarrass the race, the whole race. Don't embarrass your whole county. Don't, it's this, you have this burden where you walk through life like, do not embarrass us, the whole us. And so it's interesting to have that freedom to be in a space where you are just speaking for yourself and you're not embarrassing the race. I mean, you may be, but you've given permission to say what
you're sharing your truth. You're
sharing your truth.
You're sharing your truth.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny because Rhea always say that I got stuff I gotta wait till my mama dead. And so that's kind of what you were saying. You were like, they're still alive. I can't write that yet.
Yeah. There's something, I think there's something empowering about that too. And yes, it makes for great stories, but you're the expert in your stories. If any of us had to show up representing our professions or, even our whole families, we'd have to slip off into nuance because, I had, cousins who were of darker skin tone than me. And so I know that growing up in a community where colorism was real, that had an impact on our story. So anytime I tell a story about us, I start getting anxious because I know that there's some points where my story diverges from others. So we're experts in our own stories. And when you're just telling a story and all you have to do is account for what you remember, that has a kind of empowering quality, I think.
Okay, I got two things to say here. First of all, Kimberly and I, we always kind of joke about it. I mean, it's not entirely funny, but this idea of how different it is for a lot of us white people to go home for Christmas and what we might encounter. And that it's very stressful, and that we spend, a lot of us as white people, I think, spend a lot of time try not to see certain people and to be in those situations. I mean, I've walked out of many rooms in my life in Neshoba County and up north and various and other places because what people said. So y'all were talking about it. I'm like, just stop embarrassing me. It's kind of like what I want to say. But and then the second thing, and I think they all of this converges. But one of our readers, Shay, our producer, had put up on the screen someone bringing up I think what is a very important question, and I think the answer is, as you were saying, slightly complicated, but this idea of race as a construct. And I think that I was already thinking in this conversation, about how, race is a construct. And I think that we all know this and that we can agree on that. I mean, whiteness, when we talk about whiteness, we're really talking about what was created as a tool of white supremacy, like all of these different people that a century ago, even in this country, Germans or certainly Jewish Germans, different Italians, people from other places who weren't considered white were being blocked from immigrating into this country. That's something that I think isn't taught enough so that people understand that whiteness kind of keeps this construct kind of keeps expanding to take in more white people. It's a numbers game as much as anything else, to maintain power and control. But then, there's a lot to be said about that, but that's kind of the basic way to summarize it. But then people will say, and it's a logical question, well, why are we talking about race and racism if race is a construct and it's not a real thing? And, so the way that I have often kind of dealt with that question as I've become more educated on these issues from conversations like this, is well, we kind of have to talk about race until we don't have to anymore, you know, and until we stop using it as this, especially the dominant culture, if you will, white culture, stop using it as a bludgeon or using it as a way to kind of embed inequity, so that people don't have the same access to the same neighborhoods, to the same kinds of credit, to the same kinds of opportunities. So that's the thing. I would love to stop talking about race, because some white people particularly will come along and say, "Oh, that's you just want to talk about race." No, I really don't. I promise. I would like to not need to talk about race and racism, but we have to.
Yeah.
And then that kind of ties back to what you guys are doing on Tuesday, or what we're all doing on Tuesday, is to try to, we kind of all have to come together, or at least most of us, in order to get past it. And something one time, and I'm preaching, but I'm about to stop. One time I was speaking to some classes at Mississippi State, where I went for my undergrad, and there was some very well-meaning young people we were talking about racism and inequity and some other things, and we're saying, well, don't we talk about it too much? Because my friends and I, we don't, that's not us anymore. So we would all just like to stop talking about it. And so my answer back to her, this one young woman who said it, who was actually in journalism, so this is really important, was that, well, if we just stop talking about it with the inequities in place, we set them in place. Like we can't equalize in a real kind of way all of these things that we're talking about. This is my very simplistic way of putting it, because we are setting it in stone right there in many ways, because we're not talking about people's, plenty of talented and promising and all young people or older people don't have the same opportunities. They don't have the same access to the things that some other people have. So, and I've said that to a lot of people over the years, and a good number of them have actually said, "Oh, I got to think about it." They hadn't
thought about it that way.
Logical in that. So I think I'd like you, Rhea, maybe to just kind of bounce off of that, to kind of bring this back to this idea of why these conversations are still so vital,
necessary,
right? And then what we need to get out of them.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the Baldwin quote that I shared, and the example that you gave was a great example. I'm sure you all have heard this too. Oh, that happened hundreds of years ago. That doesn't impact me. I've had several white friends to say, that was way back then. This has nothing to do with me now. Well, that is not true. And so these opportunities to get us to healing, we have to talk about the trauma and the realities of what happened. When you think about systemic racism, I read a piece earlier today that in certain states, Black folks after slavery, even when they were free, were taxed at a higher rate. It was just an existence tax in some cases. It was a tax to allow you to walk around freely, and other people didn't have that tax, an individual tax. Redlining. I mean, we don't have enough time here to cover all the things, but this is an opportunity to have those conversations, to share what your reality is, and meet people where they are. If as an African American female, it's not something that we just talk about. Racism is not something that you just talk about. You live it, you deal with it each and every day. There's not a day that I've lived that I've not faced some type of racism. And over time, that builds up, that trauma is there. And so we need opportunities for healing. Other people may not even realize they need healing. So I think about my parents' generation, my grandparents. There were very few of them, great uncles and aunts, very few of them who even talked about their experiences because they were either so traumatized or trying their best to protect the young people in their lives so that we could go further and not have the weight of that trauma. That was their way of dealing with it. And it's still hard now. We ask questions all the time. Sometimes we get answers and sometimes we don't. But we have to understand that in order to really get to healing, we've got to deal with these systems and transform them and work to remove ourselves of these inequities in these major systems to help everybody. Institutions and structures that impact our lives, and from education to housing to healthcare to transportation, justice, and the economy. These were all created by people, sometimes to keep others from being able to fully access them. And we have to acknowledge these injustices. And that's, just one part of achieving true racial equity. Healing from racism is an essential step on the road to achieving racial equity.
Ooh, may I just
Please, Vaughn.
I'm itching to add just a Rhea, and listen, let me tell you, when you the first thing you said was you went back to the Baldwin quote, right to my heart, because that's what, if you can't heal it if you don't
can't.
see it. I was listening to an interview about a week or so ago, and it was an author. I think her book is the Pain Gap, and it is how sexism and racism are killing women. One of the statistics she stated, I hope I don't get this wrong, but it's close. She said a Black woman with a college degree is 3 times as likely to die giving birth to a child than a white woman with a high school diploma. There are so many statistics like that where the disparity exists. It's a racial disparity.
Yeah.
Dr. Ibram Kendi in his book Stand from the Beginning says that racism, all of the isms, don't get operationalized until it is in one's interest to do so, political, economic, social interest. That is why you can have friends and you can go to parties and have a great time. You can do all sorts of things together with friends of a different race, so long as the fear of scarcity does not enter the relationship.
Yep.
Wow.
When there is
That's
something
deep.
to be
Yep.
gained, that is when the ism gets operationalized.
Exactly.
And we, I think kind of to help, that's a tool, like to understand that is really useful, because there are no individual solutions to systemic problems. When systems and machines are created, and if we were great, engineers, and we created a machine to produce a thing, that machine is going to continue to produce that thing, whether we're standing in front of it or not, until we make an adjustment to it that allows it to produce something else. So I want to just honor the commenter's point about race being a construct. Yes, it absolutely is. And so we can say that and then say, well, doesn't that mean because we know that, doesn't it mean it does not matter? No, it absolutely matters. It has real implications. And where its implications are probably clearest is that it was a construct created for class purposes or economic purposes. It is operationalized most these days when it is to the economic benefit of some, to maintain a weak labor force, or if there's a belief that this particular resource is finite and there's not a lot of potential to grow it, and we want to make sure that we or our folks have security around it, that might mean denying the resource to others. right? It's not necessarily that you want to see them not flourish, but what you want to make sure of is that you don't ever have to experience scarcity. And so if I may just quote, Governor William Winter said one time, it was these 5 propositions he thought everybody agreed on. They wanted a good job that they could provide for their family with. They wanted a nice house on a safe street. They wanted education for their kids. They wanted access to health care that would allow them to live and thrive. And the 5th one was that they wanted dignity and respect.
Yeah.
And when you look at any of those 5 areas of our lives, and you will see where race and the other isms create barriers and limit potential. So yeah, it's a construct, but it's real.
And I'm gonna
go ahead, Kimberly. Go ahead.
Piggyback on Von just slightly, because I see a shift in what I see happening now, because I think what's happening is the powerful are willing to sacrifice their children in a way that maybe they haven't been before, because we're in pockets of the South, your entire families are leaving, and that one person that is the power broker in the state is the only person left. In Mississippi, if your young person wants to have children, however they want to do that, biologically, adopt, whatever, it's a dangerous place for a person with children or a person that wants to have children, because what if they need medical care? Or what if you need medical care as a person who's biologically having children? And so I think that this time is particularly pivotal because it's all bets are off. I will do anything to retain my power. I will even sacrifice my young, and in order to, because the systems I've created, the systemic problems that have created my wealth, created my power, created my whatever, my world, they aren't serving my children. Like, my children are looking at me saying, this does not serve me, and I'm leaving, right? And so at some point, the cost and sum is not going to equal, because you're not going to have anybody to go work wherever you think you want them to work, because they're not going to be here.
Exactly.
So it's like I see a scorched earth policy in a lot of pockets.
So I want to add. Let me add to that, Kim, if you don't mind, and it won't be long. I've often thought about this. Can you imagine a Mississippi where we didn't have to deal with racism, and all children were able to reach their fullest capacity? And not just Mississippi. Think about the country. If we enacted laws, if we had policies in place, if we did what was right in terms of developing our young people from the time that they were born, providing the health care to the mom, to the child, every step of the way, think about how far ahead of other countries we would be, since we continually talk about China and other countries and how they may be outpacing us in some areas. If we did what was right by our people, there would not be a doubt. We wouldn't be last. Mississippi wouldn't be last. We'd be in a different place if we would acknowledge and come to grips with the issues that we've talked about this evening.
And not only would we be in a different place, it's like everybody would be better off.
Yes.
I mean, economically.
Exactly.
I mean, that's one of the things all of the research shows is that all of this power maintenance, racism, systemic, all of that, this inequity, it mires us all in place, and numbers and otherwise. And I think that's what's so difficult. I mean, it's one, y'all know, I think that we're starting this summer, we're starting what we call the Education Equity Solutions Lab, reporting lab, something we want to do for a long time. And and part of what we're going to be doing is kind of doing what we had done in Nottoway County, where we were looking at attacks on education, historic attacks on education, starting at in Reconstruction to basically stop Black people from getting equal rights to educate their kids. And they were saying, I mean, leaders then would say out loud that they were doing this so that Black people wouldn't gain power. I mean, they didn't hide it at all then. All we have to do is go back and look at that history, right? And so, but that hasn't served anybody. In the 60s, they set up segregation academies, as happened across the country. The one in Nottoway County, so many white people have fled that area that the segregation academy closed, and so it's just this race to the bottom to hold on to this these machinations of racism, and look, I get it that people are ashamed of things in their family's past. I got some I'm not so happy about. I don't dwell in shame. I try to put it into something else, but it's hard to find these things out. And a lot of white people who think their families are too poor to own slaves just need to go back and do the real family history, what it
and that
used to be.
that you didn't benefit. There's not an institution. If you invest in the stock market, whatever institution that you benefit from, there is some link to slavery and the slave trade, because that's what this country is built on.
That's right. The slave trade built Wall Street in many ways. I mean, I've reported on that. Right. Go ahead.
There's another facet to that is not rooted in the gain, but actually tells the story of the cost. Another wise old white mentor of mine was one of the first people to tell me that racism cost white people so much, those who were identified as white. The system has never had a problem. The white supremacist structure for economic gain, for which it was created, has never had a problem throwing poor white folks to the trash heap of history. Right? Not just their labor, but their stories, the richness of the cultures that they created have always been on the chopping block. Slavery, the institution of slavery, drove down the wages in ways that, if you weren't a slave owner, you could barely afford to make it. And they were paid the wage of whiteness, this belief that, listen, no matter how bad things are for you, at least you're not a, whatever it were called. And I think there's another element of this that is important to our work. And I know that the Kellogg Foundation and others have made some really meaningful contributions to this. In Mississippi, I think we would benefit a lot from breaking down the Black-white binary of race and making sure that people understand that there's a whole nation of people who were made second and then third class citizens on this very land. In my bio, it always states that I am a steward of Choctaw land, because the narrative of their life and existence has been, hidden in a lot of ways. We helped support the screening of a documentary called Far East, Deep South a few months ago that tells the story of a family of Chinese immigrants. Those Chinese immigrants, a lot of them were brought to the United States and brought to the South in Mississippi on boats that were chartered by plantation owners after the Civil War. And they had to find a place in this racial hierarchy. And when schools were desegregated, some of those Chinese people had to sue to get access to the best education that was available, or I'll say the best resourced education spaces in the state, and they did not succeed. So there are a lot of stories. Like there are a lot of brown people here in Mississippi. They're the Vietnamese folks who've been on the coast for a long time, helping it thrive. And when you spend time with these people, you see how you see the impact
Mm-hmm.
of it with a story that you're not used to hearing or you haven't been socialized to dismiss.
Right.
So that is, I think that's an important element of making the need to engage in this work kind of percolate in people's minds and hearts.
Mm-hmm. And Kim
When
and Donna, can I just add one thing? I pulled it up. I wanted to make sure I had the facts correct. The WK Kellogg Foundation put out a document or several documents in 2018, the business case for racial equity.
Yes.
Did it for the US and then for all of our places. So if we eliminated disparities and closed the racial equity gap in the US, by 2050, we would stand to have 8 trillion more in our economy. 8 trillion. In Mississippi, 54 billion. So these are the kinds of opportunities, particularly economic opportunities, that we've missed out on because we've not dealt with systemic racism.
Yeah, Vaughn, it's interesting you're talking about the Vietnamese community on the coast because this is the conversations you have. So when I was in grad school with a couple of Vietnamese people, and then I was a teaching assistant, and there were a couple Vietnamese students. And it was the first time I heard about Vietnamese immigrants being lured here, passports being held. They did a couple of raids on the coast when I was in grad school of these auto body shops where they were forcing, or chop shops really, forcing the immigrants to work in the shops, not giving them the pass. That's almost every forced immigration or compliant immigration story. Is that story of coming somewhere and being used, and helping people create wealth while you're at the bottom of the rung. I had no idea anything like that was happening, and that was not in the 90s on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi.
Right.
So it's these conversations where you go, oh, like it looks like everything's fine on the surface. But everybody who is of a disenfranchised group in one way or another, the story of that first generation is pretty similar in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Yeah,
We're all quiet there for a second.
well, look,
not
I do actually. I'm just going to jump. I'm not going to be bashful about it.
No,
I'm
please.
loving y'all. I was so looking forward to this. I was nervous about it. If I may, I want to switch from race as the identity of oppression. One of the things that I think happens, particularly in the racial healing conversations, the TRHT model, the dialogue type model that we use, is other parts of our identities tend to bubble up. And what we learn is that oppression around other identity categories tends to function the same way. So one of my favorite stories to tell, and sometimes I tell it and it's said I do it in poor taste. So there's no better place to do it than Facebook Live or YouTube Live. So, I know that Rhea's a football fan. I see her at a lot of Jackson State games. When you go to old sports arenas and it's like halftime, well, actually everywhere but HBCUs, at halftime, people go get food and use the bathroom. The lines at the women's bathrooms are always so much longer than the men's bathrooms, right? And I'll tell you in like really, really short order, when men go in the bathroom, we can use it with our arms out like this. We can do whatever we want if it's just us in there. But the more men come in, the tighter we get. We can even kind of turn. We only have one rule in the bathroom. That's that nobody looks down, right? Mm-hmm. It's the only rule. We'll adjust to allow more men in. But based on what my wife and my daughters and every woman in my life has ever told me, women don't have that option of making that adjustment to make room, right? But the face cost of your ticket is the same. So we have football stadiums, arenas built all over the world that by design were built inequitably. They were not designed with everybody who would attend sporting events in mind. So you can't say, well, they were designed for all men. No, they were designed by all men. Because I think a woman with resources, conscientious of her own experiences, would have designed stadiums with larger bathrooms so that the through pace is equitable, right? As a man, I love saying that in spaces because the men in the room never give that any thought. We're completely blind to the privilege of that experience. And we are completely blind to the burden that women have to bear after having paid the same price for the ticket, right? So that's just one example of how in the gender space, you see how inequity is structured. And, for some people, they've had some traumatic experiences, maybe with people of a different race. And so they are resistant to the analysis of how this is showing up in the lives of people not like them. But you can't do that analysis, right, of the gender-based experience and not soon understand its applicability to other spaces. I have lots of able-bodied friends who have gone in and out of the same building every work day for 15 years, and they still couldn't tell you where the ramps are or where, ADA accessible equipment is, because it's without exposure to those stories and those experiences, and an emotional and mental willingness to sit with them.
That's not on their radar.
Empathetically, we won't do it. So I apologize for hijacking the conversation, but I think that to expand the way people think about their experiences and the privileges and the burdens that exist around them is that is the great value of dialogue-centered racial healing work.
Well, I'm glad you said that. And if we had another hour, we could go on about this. But no, and I've been, I've done a lot of, been in a lot of race dialogue rooms and circles and such. And the truth is, gender often is left out of that in many ways, or out of those same rooms. And while I was listening to you talk about the bathrooms, I'm thinking about that's also, it's almost like a metaphor for how organizations are built and who is in charge and how how women are treated differently from men, or the tables that, obviously for all women, this can be a problem. For Black women and brown women, it's a worse problem, but it's still a problem. And we see, and media has been one of the worst industries for this, and still is in many ways. And so, I hear exactly what you're saying. And the good news is we don't have to pick one thing. I mean, we're better off, like you guys are saying, even, beyond the Black-white narrative, also means just being more aware across the board of inequity, and just saying, and the one thing I kind of feel like I have to say as the white person in the room is, white people, stop being afraid of this. It's really okay. In fact, just show up. Don't be the first one to talk. Most of the time. And I have learned that, and I like it. I usually wasn't the first one. As a woman, I would hold back. So it wasn't as hard for me to figure that out. But my point is to this is good. You expand your circles. You have a better understanding of yourself. Your ancestors aren't you. Y'all like to say it all the time. Well, act like it. They're not you. I am not defined by what my ancestors did. I do believe it's my responsibility to know and to do what I can to, reverse some of the effects of that. But it's okay. And I think I know we all understand that it can be hard to get a lot of white people into these kinds of conversations. So I guess my testimonial for what Rhea and what the Kellogg Foundation is doing on Tuesday and what MSNBC is doing, I'm wrapping up, Shay, I promise, is just listen, dial in and listen and process it. Just don't be afraid. You don't have to wallow in shame. In fact, shame doesn't really do any good. And it is Black people who told me that. Stop it with the guilt.
Yeah.
Just stop the guilt. Just get on with it and do stuff, because guilt doesn't, it's okay to feel it every now and then, but it doesn't really help. And it just makes us feel worse, and we just don't have to dwell there. Right. We can listen, we can learn, we can be parts of those conversations. And as Rhea was saying, we're all better off economically and otherwise if we figure out how to do something about these inequities.
When we find when we get the engineer, the architect who has an ethical approach to equity in their work, and they design stadiums with a third bathroom, we'll understand it better. We'll be better able to receive it. That there are people who don't conform to the norms of gender, right? So it's like there's a blessing on the other side of the hard part.
Exactly.
And I just have to plug the event that a group of partners here, the Mississippi Urban League and the Museum of Art and the Foundation for the Mid-South, we're having a conversation after that phenomenal youth conversation that you all are having with Jarius and Macy and the whole gang. We're having an event at the Museum of Art from 5 to 7, where we have an incredible group of artists, Kiese Lehman and Aria Marie and the metro area's own Talamika Bryce. And they're going to talk about art and voice. Art has an amazing way of helping some of us discover how much healing we need to do. And it also has great utility in the healing process. And I just don't think there are better people than them to kind of help guide some of us, share some of their stories. And I'm really excited that the Alluvial Collective gets to be a part of that.
Well,
that's great.
Man, you guys, I knew it would be great. I knew we wouldn't have enough time because, we have plenty to say on this. I know all of us really mean this when we say, if this is a conversation that you want to have with one of us, get in touch and we will figure out how to get you to have conversations or get you into dialogues. We have the connections to do that. So all of us. So please get in touch with us if you're interested in participating in some sort of future dialogue. I'll tell you all more about it later, but the MFP is working on some conversations as well. We do solution circles, but we're you have on the screen right now. Vaughn had mentioned this already, but our event for the National Day of Racial Healing is put together by Ariel Hudson. She's from Tunica, and she was the University of Mississippi's first Black woman Rhodes Scholar. And you can see the other amazing young people that are going to be part of this conversation. And I just, join us. This is our special MFP Live next week, which is on Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time. Please just come back and listen to what they have to say. I'm going to be there listening. Macy Brown. Y'all know these are incredible
superstars.
Young people. They are superstars from the state. And so we're really excited about that conversation. So please join us for that. All of our MFP Lives are recorded and they are on all the channels. They're even on LinkedIn now. These are live all over the place. So you could please share this show later with other people. Share it on your Facebook page, share it in your various social networks, because please share the show, but we also really want this conversation to continue. Tune in for the Kellogg event on Tuesday. What time again? Give us some quick information.
Telemundo, it will be at 6, and the English version with MSNBC is going to be at 9 Central.
Okay.
So tune in.
Please tune in. We'll be watching, and we really appreciate you guys coming to do the show. We knew it would be fantastic, and we're big fans, as you know.
So Donna, it would be malpractice if I didn't say this. Our organization was created to help develop a model that Mississippians, first and foremost, could use to have these conversations, frankly, where it matters most, close to home. So I want to encourage folks to reach out to us. There are incredible resources. We will help. We meet people where they are to help them engage in these types of dialogues in their community in ways that build bridges of trust, as we say, strong enough to bear the weight of the truths that they must tell. So we'll be really excited to help any community members who are looking to lead in this work.
Thank you so much for saying that. And we'll be talking, because I would love to do some stuff with you guys as well.
Yes.
And one more thing that Kimberly's going to be really upset with me if I don't talk about this is that we just had incredible fundraising season, and we're really grateful to everybody who supported our work from the $5 donations on up. And right now we're in the middle of member month. And so you can become a member of what we call MFP VIP Club for as little as $10 a month, all kinds of talks and experiences that you'll be able to see, as well as go back and watch the recordings of them. This is our new member event, which is going to be on Tuesday, January 24th. As you can see, Ellen Morris Pruitt, a great MFP supporter, is going to be talking about creativity. So we know everybody's in the New Year's mode of learning. So please join us for that. And all you have to do is go to mfp.ms/join, and you can join the MFP VIP Club, and you're not going to regret it, because it's really fantastic. So now Shay keeps reminding me we're a little over, but it was worth it. So we got to get out of here. Remember,
we got 4 Southerners in the room. What did she do?
I know, 4 Southerners who like each other a lot. And then here we go. So MFP Live on Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. Come watch that panel and all of these other events. And then otherwise, we'll see y'all in a couple of weeks with our next MFP VIP show after that. Thank you. Thank you, Rhea. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thanks.